Stories of an Aircraft Builder. After the refreshing article by Tom Krings in his beautiful magazine Arnold, which I read to you in episode 23, it is now time to break it down a bit, otherwise a wrong impression could arise. Of course, Tom talked to me, but he was sitting alone in his office when he wrote the article, and that's where misunderstandings and the space available for the article in his magazine come together. In addition, it wasn't important to me personally at the time that individual connections were 100% correct. It didn't matter at the time. The following years were the perfect wave for me. And as someone sang at the time, just let it carry you, don't even think about it. At the time, you couldn't tell from the bright blue sky that this wave would turn into a tsunami that almost swept me and the whole young family into the abyss. But when I look back over the years and tell you what happened, these connections are somehow important now. From Tom's article, the reader can take away that I have founded my company Engels Aeroplanbau in Schorndorf because the banker living in England made this possible with his order for the construction of 2 airplanes. That was not the case. This was only possible when another person came into my family's life. This person was Peter Jackson. Quite rightly, the well-known man from New Zealand. He made a lot of things possible that I can thank him for. But together with the banker, he also tore a lot of things down again. As good as it gets, so bad. But more on that later. When things started to go with the banker, I was working as a railwayman on shift change duty. I had trained as a railwayman in operations services specializing in dispatching. However, these jobs were being cut further and further at the railroad, and if I wanted to keep my income after my apprenticeship, I had to switch to train attendant service and work as a train driver on the Ireland-Stuttgart line. Anyone familiar with the railroad's shift rotation service knows that there are very long shifts as well as very short shifts. So, there are weeks when you were on the rails for about 12 hours a day and others when you started work at 1 AM and finish it at 8 AM. The rest of the day was off. What do you do productively during this time? Right, you build airplanes. The agreement with the banker was also based on this. A workshop was to be rented in which the 2 airplanes were to be built. I did not receive any payment in the sense of remuneration for this. The workshop rent was paid by the banker, as were all the materials for his aircraft, the necessary machines and tools. He was also fully responsible for the registration of the aircraft, both financially and organizationally. That means registering the project etc. in his name. Of course I had to pay for all these things for my aircraft myself. One reason for this was that the banker was toying with the possibility of being able to manufacture and sell the aircraft in a certain number of units. However, the law now stipulates that a private individual may not use an aircraft manufactured as a one-off for commercial purposes. So, serious production is ruled out. However, the self-builder or home builder is allowed to register up to 3 aircraft of the same type as one-offs. So, if only my name had been registered, 3 airplanes would have been possible, 1 for me, 1 for him, and 1 for potential sale. It was different if I registered my aircraft and he registered his. Then, suddenly there would be 6 feasible aircraft. Those were his thoughts. It was tight at the end of the month for me, but manageable, and it was important to me that I could follow my purpose without my family suffering. On the whole, I was grateful to Oliver Wolf for this, and my dear Alexandra felt the same way. But that's not our topic today. Be patient. The wave was just picking up speed and it was still good for surfing. So, it wasn't as it seemed in Tom's article that the banker made all the possible and then someone else appeared. So I worked alternating shifts at the railroad and spent every 3 minutes in the workshop in Schondorf. The work was all documented photographically at the time, just as with my triplane. The two Fokker D7s were primarily intended for research into the construction of the aircraft and the evaluation of the documents used for this purpose. That was the purpose of the project, and the reason why the banker approached me in the first place. I want a true to original Fokker D7, and in my opinion you are the only one who can and will do it. Those were his words to me on the sofa at my home. My workshop also had a small office where I set up 2 drawing boards on which I drew new construction plans based on my research. This was necessary because of the planned approval by the German CAA. And every evening I showed my work on the internet, which in the meantime had also become part of my life. Most young people today can no longer imagine that this was something new at that time that just emerged. At the time, I was still of the naive opinion that showing the work would help the cause and advance it. Anyone who followed my daily publications in the forum at theaerodrome.com will remember how nerve-wracking it was back then. Most people were actually listening in the background with interest, but I was particularly struck by those who took part in the discussion. They were interesting discussions, and the entire discussion thread, with thousands of photos and countless pages, was by and large fruitful and became a kind of driving force on the site. But there were also some pretty nasty people among them. It was mainly older acquaintances who were on the site and didn't have a good word to say about my work. Manfred Thiemeyer used my copycat nickname he wanted to spread. Udo Jürges, Dan Abbott, and many others whose names I've already forgotten. Of course, there were also nice people who are still in contact with me today and still follow my work with interest. I'm not talking about criticism, which may be justified and can help to improve things or put things right, but about very crude hostility and vulgar insults. Dan was never a friend of mine, but at least he stood by his name with his insults, while the other keyboard warriors hid behind pseudonyms. But that's the way they are. Anyone who remembers now knows that I always tried to at least disagree with them in a friendly manner and always backed up my opinion with sources which I showed on the forum. In the end, I withdrew from the forum completely, as there was no point. Even Alexandra sometimes shook her head in the evening when she read what some people were saying. But there were also people in the background who were just watching and probably realized where I was actually going. One of them was Peter Jackson, and he must have thought my work was interesting enough to call me at Christmas 2004. It was funny when the phone rang and Alexandra answered, called me and said Peter Jackson was on the line. We had a nice chat for about 10 minutes and he asked me if I wanted to build airplanes for him. Of course I wanted to. It was all I ever wanted to do in my life. At that time, I was still working with the railroad. My basic attitude was that I was always on duty and always stood in for colleagues who couldn't make it. I never took vacation during the year and saved everything up. However, I always said that I would be happy to work a shift on December 24th, but that I would take all my overtime and vacation days from December 25th on and only come back when everything was paid off. The vacations were always good when I forgot the number combination for the door at the office on the day of my return. It was the same this Christmas. Peter Jackson said he wanted to meet me and invited me to visit him in New Zealand. I told him that was nice, but I wouldn't go on a trip around the world without my family. No problem, he said, and arranged for me and mine to spend 14 days in Wellington at the Hotel Duxton. We worked out a contract, and when I got back to Germany, I called my supervisor and told him to please take me off the roster because I wouldn't be coming back. There was a certain amount of snorting and something about notice periods and so on, but I didn't come back, and that was just as well. The railroad hasn't been burning coal for a long time, but, oh well, let's leave it at all. Basically, I was not employed by Peter Jackson or one of his companies, but was hired as a freelancer for the aircraft production. Again, there will be more about this later. The next step was to go to the local court and to set up a company under the name Engels Aeroplanbau. So it was not the banker who made this possible, but the Lord of the Things. So much for a brief addendum to the impressions that can arise when you simply accept other people's articles without being asked. What happened over the following years was due to my work, its presentation on the internet, and Peter Jackson, not Oliver Wolf, even if he would like to believe that. He was more of a hindrance than a help. But before I tell you from the retrospective of the future what went wrong, I'd like to tell you in the next few episodes about my museum dream that Tom mentioned in his essay, and show you a few of the articles published during this time. But don't worry, the really exciting stuff is yet to come.